Hello, and thank you for joining us on tonight's Ask Andrew show, Canada's first Facebook live streaming family law question and answer show. My name is Andrew Feldstein, and I'm the principal of Feldstein Family Law Group. Both myself and our entire firm practices exclusively in the area of family law with offices in Markham, Vaughan, Oakville, and Mississauga. Today, we are joined by our guest, Tina Hinsperger, to discuss the topics of how COVID-19 has impacted families and their issues in the context of family law. Tina is a registered social worker and accredited family mediator with over 25 years of experience specializing in parenting, separation and divorce, decision making and parenting time, grief, and elder issues. In the past, Tina has worked in a variety of capacities, including child protection and the criminal justice system. Tina has been a clinical investigator with the panel of the Office of the Children's Lawyer for more than 20 years and is a roster family mediator with both work through the Orangeville and Newmarket courthouses. She has been the program coordinator of the Supervised Access Program in Dufferin County for 20 years and previously worked with the Peel Supervised Access Program until 1994. Tina has a private practice in Orangeville, Ontario, consisting of family mediation, elder mediation, and counseling. She has developed and facilitated cooperative seminars in the past and has written articles for community newspapers. She is committed to assisting families to minimize conflict and resolve their issues. They're able to move forward in a cooperative way. So thank you for joining us today, Tina.
Thank you for having me.
So obviously you have a significant amount of experience in the area. I would call it a family disputes and family healing, and that's why you're here today on the show. And I wanted to start out with, generally speaking, what might your involvement look like in working with families who hire your services?
So, much of my practice focuses on family mediation. So that would be bringing together two parents who are wanting to cooperatively work through a parenting plan. They may also want to mediate the financial issues that they might have at hand, and hopefully arrive at a suitable resolution at the end of that process. I also do Voice of the Child reports. So that's another part of what I do, as well as custody access assessments. So with those Voice of the Child reports and those custody access assessments, those tend to be more conflictual families who are requiring some more significant intervention.
Okay, so for the viewers, you said quite a bit. I think most people know what mediation means. I don't think a lot of people appreciate what a voice of the child means, and maybe you could help explain that.
Okay, so so this is something that's become much more popular within the court system over the last few years. So what a Voice of the Child report is typically the social worker who is involved with the family would solely be meeting with the child. So what I will do is I will have two meetings with the child. I'll meet with the child in one home, and then I'll meet with the child in the other home as well. So with in each of the parents' homes, or pre-COVID, I was meeting with people in my office. So I would always have two meetings with the child, where one parent might bring the child to the office one time, and then the other parent brings them to the office the other time. And the report solely is really information coming from the child around what they would like to see, what their impressions are of their family, what their input is around how they would like to move back and forth between both parents. Um, so typically they're older children, although I have interviewed uh, very young children as well. and sometimes when there's a sibling group too, there might be one child who's maybe 14, 15, and another child who's much younger.
So, right now, when you're doing the voice of the child, are you doing that over Zoom?
Yes, I'm doing everything over Zoom currently.
Okay. And that really, to me, is one of the problems we have now, because I know for myself in some of my cases, there's allegations that when the social worker, such as yourself, is
Mhm.
having the Zoom consult with the child, that the other parent is standing on the other side of the monitor and directing the child what to say.
That is that's a concern of mine as well. It's been a concern of mine from the beginning when COVID started, when I did transition. Um, Zoom Zoom can be a great way of connecting with people, but it definitely has its drawbacks. And one of the drawbacks is definitely trying to interview children um, through Zoom, because yes, even though um, I ask them at the beginning whether there's anybody in the room, I get them to move their camera around to show me that they're by themselves in the room. I don't know for sure whether or not there's a parent standing outside that door, whether the parent's down the hall, whether there's even maybe a sibling who's wandering by, right? So so trying to kind of ascertain who else might be in the house, who might be overhearing, whether they're overhearing intentionally or unintentionally. And I worry that um, these children may not feel as comfortable sharing details with me when they know that their parent is down the hall or maybe downstairs, and could potentially be overhearing something. Um, yeah.
And I know in one of my cases, we actually have an order by the judge, and it only worked when the schools were open,
Hmm.
that all of the child's counseling sessions would not take place at the parent's home, but would take place at the school
Yeah.
via Zoom. So that way the child could openly discuss their issues without the fear of one of the parents listening in,
Yeah.
especially when you think of some parents in this day and age living in small condominiums.
Yeah. And, prior to the pandemic, if I was not meeting with children in my office, my preferred location was to meet with them at school. It was a nice neutral location to meet with them. I didn't need to worry about having each parent bringing the children to the office and what was going to be said in that car ride home. So I always liked the opportunity to meet with children at school because of that reason. And I think parents have the best intentions in mind, but it's a very stressful time for them, and so they do want to know what's happening, and what the child may have said, and they may ask questions, not realizing how much pressure is being put on these children.
Well, and one of the greatest limitations in Voice of the Child is that you're not concerned, I shouldn't say not concerned, that's not fair, but the inquiry isn't about is what the child really saying, their own views and preferences, versus the child parroting what one or both of the parents have told them to say.
And I do think I, I know that they are getting ordered more frequently within the court system. I think that where a Voice of the Child report may be appropriate is when you've got an older child who's very um, strong in their views and preferences, as well as to adults who are committed to putting their child first, to respecting whatever comes out of those interviews, right? So it takes a certain level of maturity, a certain ability to be able to really take a step back from the conflict that's going on between the parents. And not everybody is able to do that. Not everybody is going to be able to um, look at that voice of the child report and not feel, um, heard if it's not, if it doesn't say what you want it to say, so.
Which is very different than doing a Section 30 custody and access assessment, which is a lot more than 2 visits with each child. And you are taking into account whether or not the child's, what they're saying to you is really what they mean to be saying to you, and whether it's expressing the opinions of one or both of the parents.
Yes.
But
Yes.
Unfortunately, my feeling is the Zoom interviews are ripe with abuse for parents to be influencing the children. And I think it's a real problem when these Zoom meetings are taking place in one of the parents' homes. I know I've had some cases where we've insisted that if we go, whether it be a voice of the child, a Section 112 Office of the Children's Lawyer, or a Section 30 assessment, we've insisted that the meetings take place in person outside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't work in January or February, but as the weather starts to warm up, it does work. And at least it avoids that problem.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next question is, I'd like to know, how has COVID changed the landscape of your work?
Well, I think the biggest change that has happened was having to transition to strictly meeting with clients online. So either conducting interviews with clients via telephone or via Zoom, parents and children. That's probably about the biggest change that has happened. And even my family mediation, that's all online as well. And along with that, there's a learning curve, in terms of that whole piece. I think the other thing is that there so many there have been so many people who've needed to reach out during COVID. So it's increased the layers that families are dealing with, right? Because not only are families dealing with their separation and divorce issues, but they're also dealing with a lot of stresses around financial issues, and so maybe having to be off work, challenges with them having to be home as well. So it's challenging not only to interview children, but it's challenging to interview their parents from home when they've got children underfoot, because I don't want the children to overhear any of the conversation I'm having with their parents. So that's a huge challenge as well. And I've had interviews where parents have gone to sit in their car for the interview, because that way they know the child's not going to be around. The child's inside the home. So that's been a huge challenge as well.
Well, it creates a difficult dynamic right now where we have a stay-at-home order, so kids aren't going to school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of my cases where there are children and we're talking about going to mediation. And I'm not clear how both parents can be in a situation where the children don't know what's going on, because you can't really drop the kids off somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for a parent to go shut the door, be at a mediation, and the kids not being aware of it, of what's going on as they get older. And quite frankly, that puts another layer of stress into the dynamic of what needs to take place in terms of keeping children out of it.
And I've had to problem solve with parents around those pieces too. And sometimes both parents, when I'm mediating with parents, sometimes they're both still residing in the same house. So they're residing in the same house, the children are in the same house. I don't want the parents sitting side by side while we're doing the mediation. So I've got the parents each sitting in a different room on a different device, so that I can maintain some control if I need to separate them, put them in a breakout room, talk with each of them privately. So I have to be able to do that. And then if they've got children as well, I'm canvassing with them, whether or not there anybody else available to watch them? Do they have maybe extended family residing with them? And that's a challenge too, because especially if you have to stay within your bubble, it's not as though they can just drop off the children at a grandparent's home, right? The way they
Oh,
have pre-COVID.
I get that. The nice thing is, as the weather starts to improve, at the very least, depending on the age of the kids, you can get, if it's a decent
Mhm.
day, they can go in the backyard, or maybe even, well, if you're putting headphones on, you can go in the backyard so your neighbors can't hear all of your private business that you don't want them hearing, discussing a mediation. It at least creates those additional options. Whereas right now, I think if today it's a cold day, it snowed out today, you wouldn't want to spend your entire day sitting in your backyard at a mediation.
Correct.
Uh, but it is a little more challenging. And when I think of the mediations that I've done during COVID, I believe all of them to date have had adult children or older kids that did not require constant supervision during the day.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if that's part of it without even realizing it, that clients who have young children haven't even asked for it because it's not a possibility right now. Uh,
I've had some families where they've had younger children. Sometimes there's been an older um, child who's been able to look after the younger ones. There might be an older sibling or an older half sibling who's able to do that. So sometimes that's been an option, or they have extended family residing with them, and that's been an option. But definitely it is challenging when we've got younger children. I haven't had, for mediations, I don't think I've had anybody who's only had really, really young children, infants and toddlers at this point. And maybe it's like you said, they recognize that right now it may not be feasible for them to go that route.
Well, it's certainly creating more challenges. I haven't, it's first time in my career I haven't walked into a courthouse in over a year.
Hmm.
Uh, I have to say, as a lawyer for conferences, I'm really enjoying doing them on Zoom and motions on Zoom because there's a tremendous savings in cost to my clients. Instead of me driving to the courthouse, sometimes waiting 3 to 4 hours to get reached. In some courts, you start on the time you're scheduled, there's no travel time. In other courts, even when you do have to wait, the judges have been extremely accommodating. So everybody logs in at 10 o'clock and they tell you what time to come back on. So it's very different when you log in at 10 o'clock and a judge tells you to come back at 12 o'clock and you sit back down at your desk and you continue doing work for the next 2 hours on other matters, and the client isn't paying you to sit and do nothing and wait your turn. So there's some real benefits to clients from Zoom. Obviously, the downside is I think you're always better off when people meet together in order to determine what's happening. Now, I see I have a question and I need my reading glasses to read it. How do you view an instance where the preference of a teenager speaks to more about what they want, i.e., no bedtime, versus what they need? That's actually a great question.
Okay, so basically, in terms of what they need is really what I'm going to be focusing on is what's in their best interest. So when I'm doing a custody access assessment, for instance, or when I'm talking with parents about family mediation, and sometimes we're involving children in those discussions as well. I might potentially interview children in a mediation. Then really what we're talking about is we're talking about what's in their best interest in terms of how they're moving back and forth. In terms of the rules of the program, well, of the whatever's happening in each of the homes, that's something that I might have a discussion with parents about, but it really is going to be up to the parents. So it's not something that I'm going to focus a lot on, unless if they've got an issue where things are so drastically different in each home, then maybe there may be the opportunity for conversation about that. But it's a conversation. It's not. I'm not advocating for them to have fewer rules and a shorter a later bedtime, or being able to stay out later at night, those kinds of things.
Well, it's interesting. I think it's a great question, but that sounds like a question that deals with younger kids when you're talking about bedtime versus older kids.
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with younger kids, I agree with that analysis. But when you're dealing with you're not necessarily going to be a bedtime for a 16-year-old. It may be more in a normal world about what time do you expect them home on a Saturday night? Who are they going out with? Or a 17-year-old, what time you're okay with them driving if they are okay driving and who they're driving with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the problem becomes very different because you may have one parent who says, hey, kids can do whatever they want. They can come and go whenever they please. And the 17-year-old thinks, wow, this is amazing. I don't have a curfew. My mom or dad are so liberal. Versus the other parent who says, I want you home at this time. There's certain rules and they're strict. Yeah. And the problem with that is the 17-year-old is going to be old enough to choose with their feet where they want to go. Yeah. And all too often, we see one parent will, in essence, be bribing the child by saying, hey, no rules at my house. I mean, I've had clients phone up and say, Andrew, I don't know what to do. My ex is allowing my son or daughter to smoke dope all the time, and they're not doing anything to stop it. And I've told my kid that there's no dope allowed in my house. Mm-hmm. And the problem is the judge is going to say, well, they're 17 years old. There's not much we can do.
And so what's really helpful about mediation is when parents are together in that mediation, these are the types of conversations that we can be having is in terms of parenting style, in terms of what they want to see in the future. Let's talk about the areas that you might end up getting stuck. And if you've got two parents who typically have very different parenting styles, and one is really very, lax, maybe doesn't have as many rules, and then you've got another parent who had their environment's very, very structured. Those styles are very different. It's not to say one is better than the other, but this is where parents might end up clashing when they have very, very different parenting styles. So let's have conversations about that. And it's, and I'll talk to them about the fact that as kids get older, yeah, the kids are going to make those decisions with their feet. So no matter what kind of a parenting arrangement we come up with, by the time they hit about 14, 15, they're making those decisions with their feet. And if they decide, they prefer mom's rules over dad's rules, or they want to go stay with Johnny down the road, it's not so easy to be able to continue an arrangement that you may have been doing for some time. And parents need to be on the same page. So if I know when I'm speaking with parents, and usually I can tell if they're really butting heads around some of the rules, and they're talking about things like that, even if the kids are only at that point 9, 10, 11, I know that at some point you're going to be dealing with 14, 15-year-olds, and you're going to be back in front of me, or you're going to be back in court. There are going to be things that are going to be happening. So I talk to them about how important it is, especially to be on the same page when your kids hit adolescence. You really need to be on the same page. You need to be supporting each other. So even if you typically don't get along and there's a lot of conflict, we need to talk about how the two of you are going to manage this as they get older, because that's where you want to make sure that they're on the same page.
Well, that's a really good point. And I see we have another question, so it's time for the glasses again. How does the previous question relate to the context of a voice of the child assessment as opposed to a custody assessment? Another good question.
Okay, so again, a voice of the child report is really just that. It's putting forth in the courts what the child's wishes and preferences are, what they would like to see come out of this court involvement, and the judge will consider that the judge will be looking at best interest though. So just because a child puts forth these wishes and preferences doesn't necessarily mean that the judge is going to feel like that's the best way to go. The judge is going to look at all of the information from all of the professionals, from both of the parents, as well as that voice of the child report. With the custody access assessment, the difference is that you're gathering a lot of information and you're able to put whatever the child is saying to me, I'm able to put into context because I'm also meeting with the parents and gathering background information from the parents. I'm gathering information from professionals who are involved with the parents, who are involved with the children, the schools, the family doctors, counselors who might be involved with them. So what the children are saying, I'm able to paint a picture of why they might be saying that and what context they might be saying that. So that allows me to be able to provide some input to the court around what I think would be best for the kids. So just because a child says to me in a custody access assessment, I want to go live with dad. Well, why do you want to go live with dad? Well, because dad lives on a farm and he's got all of these fun ATVs and dune buggies and things like that. That's why I want to go live with dad. Well, when I'm doing my assessment, yes, I'm considering what the child is telling me, but I'm also looking at a lot of other things as well. So just because the child tells me, I'd rather be at dad's house most of the time because he's got all this fun stuff for me to do, doesn't necessarily mean that that's what I'm going to end up recommending at the end of that. I may still recommend a fairly equitable moving back and forth, or I might recommend something different, based on all of the information that I've received.
I think the key point of what you said is the question of why does the child want to live with one parent over the other? Because a good professional such as yourself is really listening to what that answer is. When it's an assessment, is it an answer that is logical? Like when I hear a 10-year-old say, I'd rather be driving dad's ATVs every night after school, it's a logical answer coming from a 10-year-old that that's fun, but that's not an answer that I think an assessor is going to base their recommendations on being in the best interest of the child. And contrast that when you hear an answer that is parroting what one parent says. And sometimes you hear language from a 10-year-old that is just completely illogical for them to have used to describe the reasoning as to why they want to be with one parent or the other. Or when they say they have a real anger to one parent, and then you probe with the question of, well, why? And there's no real answer.
And I think for me, the most concerning piece is when you have a child who paints one parent is all good and one parent is all bad. That is always the most concerning. For me, that is a very, very strong indicator that this is a child who's entrenched in the middle of conflict. If they're unable to come up with anything positive about one parent, and that's it really demonstrates to me that that the child's smack dab in the middle of that conflict, and there's a tug of war going on between the parents around that.
Which to me is usually one of the most horrific things, when the children are the casualties of the parents' dispute. And I do agree that when you see one child, when you see multiple children, and you see whether it's one child or two children or three children, and some are on both sides and some are on one side, and you can see they're completely aligned, it's always a sad statement, because you know that there's been work done to get that child aligned, unless there's a good answer. Like, you ask child, well, why is it you don't want to be with your father? Well, dad hits me, or mom hits me, or shoves me, or calls me stupid, and all sorts of things. Then you can say, okay, that's a logical response, versus, well, one time dad or mom didn't give me dinner till 8 o'clock at night, or dad does work after school while I'm doing work. And you hear the answer and you go, Okay, well, maybe I can understand you prefer being with mom over dad, but why you don't want to see mom or dad anymore just seems completely disproportionate.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
unfortunately, in this business, we rely on the human frailties of who the social workers, the mediators, the assessors are. And like in any other occupation, some are good, some are bad. Some will see it, some won't. And the practical reality is who you end up hiring on your file may have a critical component to what the outcome will be. And to our viewers, you got to do your homework and your due diligence before you hire someone to make sure that they understand that.
And there's often, I find too, many layers to that as well. So you really have to unpack that when you've got families that are that entrenched, because it could be a combination of things, just in terms of um, the child's temperament, as well as, who the parents are, so there might be some parent issues happening. There might be elements of domestic violence that may have happened in the past. There may be some other things going on, but the bottom line is that children, like the parents cannot make their relationship with the other parent. Um, they can't they can't equate that with what the child's relationship is, because the child's relationship is going to be different and should be different than the parents' relationship with each other. And so they need to be able to figure out how to separate that, so that children have the opportunity to have a relationship, however that looks, with both parents. We know children do best when they have a relationship with both parents.
Okay, well, Tina, we are out of time now, so I wanted to thank you for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure having you. Uh, the next Ask Andrew show will be on May 19th at 8 o'clock p.m. If you have any requests or ideas for future shows, or you want to be a guest on a future show, if you have an interesting topic, please email them to us at info@feldsteinfamilylaw.com. And thank you for watching.